Ken, I'd like to just show you one or two of my old maps, European old maps. This one's an interesting one, Ortelia's 1567, with Japan in a very odd place, isn't it? But it's there. It's there. Yes. And this is another Ortelia's, a little bit later, probably at the beginning of the 17th century, and is a miniature of a famous map by Teisara, with, again, Japan rather inaccurate. But this one is an early 18th century map by, with William Adams' cartouche and the little William Adams's ships.
My goodness, fascinating. You know Adams, what's his name in Japanese?
Muranji.
Yes, beautiful.
Sir Hugh, thank you so much for letting us visit you at your residence today.
Well, I'm very glad to receive you here. We're in a lovely position.
Yes, indeed, we are. Well, here we are at the British Embassy residence, and Sir Hugh Cortazzi has been the British ambassador to Japan since 1980, and he's well known for his collection of antique maps of Japan. So, Sir Hugh, thank you very much indeed for having us here. It is indeed a beautiful house, isn't it, Hiromi-san?
Marvelous.
You've been on this spot for some time, I take it.
We, the embassy came here in 1873 when the Japanese government granted us this area so long as we use it as for embassy purposes. Although in those days it was a legation, of course.
I see. Well, on we go.
Yes. Now, of course, we're going to ask you all about maps today. Well, when and how did you become interested in Japanese maps?
Well, it really happened nearly 20 years ago when my wife was going down walking down in Kanda, and we all like walking in Kanda and looking at the old bookshops there. She saw an old map of Japan in one of the shop windows and came back and said that was really rather interesting, and I went down and had a look at it, and I realized it was a map of the 1720s published or printed in Britain, actually. And then I thought, well, this is rather an interesting hobby, and we began to collect maps when we were back in England, mostly at that time, European printed maps of Japan. And then later we became interested in Japanese maps of Japan, printed maps of Japan, I have to say, because unfortunately I have never been able to afford manuscript maps, much as I should like them. But as you would understand, map making began with manuscripts before, in the years before printing developed.
Yes. Well. And most of your maps, are they European or Japanese?
Well, I have more European maps than Japanese maps, partly because European maps were easier to get hold of. I say were because they've become much more difficult to find now. They're also, I think, they've been preserved rather more easily, partly because they were printed by copper plate process normally, whereas most Japanese maps, well, not all, were woodblock prints. And the woodblock prints tended to disintegrate or get worn. And the other factor to be borne in mind is that Japanese paper and European paper are different in that, or were different, and you get Japanese paper has tended to deteriorate rather more quickly. Another factor about Japanese maps is that their size, there are many of them much larger, much broader in format. They were designed to be put on the floor, on the tatami, and looked at from various sides. So they're much bigger and therefore the bigger they are, they have to be folded, and in the folds naturally cause deterioration in the map.
Yes, well, now we talked about old maps of Japan, antique maps. How old are Japanese maps, Sir Hugh, really?
Well, the story is that they really started with Saint Gyogi Bosatsu, who was in the Nara period. He is supposed to have been the first geographer, first cartographer of Japan. But of course, his maps of Japan no longer can be found from that period. The earliest manuscript maps of Japan date from about 1305. There's one, one Gyogi type map, the most famous old map of Japan, that's the Gyogi type map in the Ninnaji temple in Kyoto. These are manuscript maps, but of course that isn't the oldest map in Japan. There were maps of estates which date back much earlier. There are some even in the Shoso in Nara.
Really?
These were state maps. Well, they were needed because people wanted to know what their land holdings were. That's understandable. You have to prove that you've got that. You want your map, and you want to see how far it stretches. The Gyogi type, the maps of Japan, were really designed to show the interrelationship between the provinces and the capital. And so you get the sort of typical Gyogi type map as kind of balloons circling out from the capital, Miyako, Kyoto.
Oh, very interesting. Now, of course, you were telling us that some of the maps were, of course, quite practical, but I've seen some other old maps which were rather artistic.
Yes, I mean, you get a lot of, I mean, not only Japanese maps, but European maps have a number of different decorative qualities. For instance, you will get ships appearing, you will get, in European maps, you get dolphins appearing, and to fill up the sea, you must fill up the space with, sometimes with mythical monsters, and sometimes with, well, with various types of vessels, and then you have on the European maps, you have the cartouche, which is at the bottom, which says who drew the map, where it was printed, and so on.
Well, now, I believe you have some examples here, and perhaps you'll
Well,
be
these
kind
are
enough.
examples of Japanese maps, which are rather different from, I mean, as I say, some of these are maps of practical maps. This map, for instance, this first one, is not a very good example. It's one all I could afford, of what they call a dochuzu, a traveler's map. Let me show you. It's rather long, and the coloring varies from section to section. Not at all, although this is almost certainly late Edo period map, and you can see it goes right over there. You've got Kyushu over here, and then Shikoku. And it's pretty inaccurate. I mean, look at Shikoku. I mean, it doesn't look...
How about Kyoto? Is he there?
Kyoto is here. Let me just, excuse me, I'll put that away like that, because otherwise it'll fall over. Here is Kyoto, or Miyako. It's just written the first character, Kyo. And then you have Lake Biwa here. And, of course, what is interesting here, and I'm an example of what you might call the beauty in maps, the way they have depicted in pictorial fashion the mountains.
Sort of almost three-dimensional, isn't it? Yes.
That's right. Unfortunately, in this map, the Fuji doesn't come out very well. But that's one example. These are all of Japanese maps rather late.
I saw some wormholes there, by the way. Is that indicative of the age of a map?
Well, it does show some aspect of age. It indicates that it was certainly printed in the Edo period. The thing is, I suspect that Japanese paper had a certain nori, I think you call it in Japanese,
the glue,
which must have attracted the worms. I don't know. The worms must have liked it. It must have been rather delicious.
Well, what else have you got there, sir?
Well, this is a map of Edo. I mean, you see more of this sort of maps of Edo, than you perhaps see of almost any other. It's a rather difficult one to spread out, if you'll forgive me. And it's really, this is, you can see why it needed to be set on the tatami.
Yes, indeed.
Now here is an example of not only beauty shown through colour, but also the decorative features. You've got your ship here. I don't quite know what these are. They look rather odd.
Like lobster baskets or something.
Yes,
like
I think they must have been. And then there's some more ships here. This was published in Kaie Rokunen, which I think is 1853. Here you've got the shoguns. Well,
yes.
imperial now, but in the shogun.
Yes.
And
so
this
the
is
British Embassy
Georgie
would have
here.
been over there somewhere.
The British Embassy was there. Well, this was, of course, at that stage occupied by daimyo yashiki, the daimyo residences. And of course now what is sad, when you look at this, you can see that,
filled in.
I mean, here was the Tokaido going down here, and of course what must be Shinagawa is now, you know, I mean, it spreads right out all over here.
How about the streets, Sir Hugh? Would they have been accurate, do you think?
Oh, I think these were pretty accurate. They were used, maps of this kind, I mean, this is late Edo, were used probably by people who were looking for where addresses and so on. And
Bring your
address is
map,
perhaps
yes.
the wrong word, but knowing where. You see, here's the Hama Goten, the Hama detached palace. As you know, it's all surrounded by buildings nowadays.
And what else have you got over there? I see you've got a thing that looks like a book.
Well, this one is a collection of maps of the different provinces. I don't know whether we could... these, if you look... that's Hoki, I think. Izumo no Kuni. This is rather nice. I mean, Izumo, as you know, with Izumo Taisha, Matsui here, and a particularly favorite part of the country for me, Mihonoseki, you know, the famous shrine at Mihonoseki as well. Not very many people know this part of what is Shimane. Unfortunately, many, and I said many Japanese do, but not many foreigners go to this area. Great pity.
Now, this map was for what specific purpose, would you say, sir?
Well, I think that these...
Used by whom?
These would have been used by, perhaps by travelers. I mean, after all, we have when we travel, we have maps of the different prefectures, don't we? Or if we're in Britain, we have maps of the different counties. So I think the traveler, I think what is interesting is that the Japanese people have always been great travelers. I notice that more people in Japan travel today than perhaps in any other country. And they certainly traveled a great deal in the Tokugawa period. But that's why I think you get the particular development of maps in the Tokugawa period. People needed maps in order to get around, essentially. But of course, they're all, I mean, not so much these small maps, but if you take this map, the one of the Dochuzu, the traveler's map, it is very inaccurate. And of course, you get inaccuracy. I mean, this is what makes, in many ways, one of the things that makes old maps so interesting, is because they are so inaccurate. I mean, how did people's knowledge of the country? I mean, so for me, old maps are interesting from a number of points of view.
So, may I say here, you would say the technique then, of course, at this time was not particularly advanced, was it then?
Not particularly advanced. Well, even that's perhaps unfair, because these maps were produced after you've had great Japanese map makers like Ino Tadataka. Ino, well, sometimes called Ino Chuke. Ino Tadataka, who must, I suppose, can rightly claim to be the greatest Japanese cartographer. He, as you probably know, was born in Chiba, what is now Chiba Prefecture, and he was a sake brewer. And then when he was about 50, he came up to Edo, now present Tokyo, in order to study astronomy. And he wanted to find out the length of a degree, exact length of a degree of latitude. And as a result of that, he did a survey of almost all Japan. He's I think perhaps the greatest surveyor of that time. And his maps are extremely accurate and, well, it's extremely accurate, not by obviously modern standards, but very accurate by previous standards. And you at long last begin to get a proper shape for Japan. It isn't entirely fair to say that he was he set an, I mean, he was revolutionary, but there had been considerable developments before him. I mean, one of the previous great map makers was Nagakubo Sekisui, a Mito samurai. His map, which the copy, I've got a copy upstairs, does show considerable development on those of the 17th century, which were very inaccurate in the sense that they compress the northern part of the country, make it look as though Japan is going from west to east, as if there was no north.
May I ask you here, how does the Japanese map makers compare with their European counterparts at the same time? Were they much on the same level or ahead?
Well, there is, I mean, one interest from my point of view is the interchange between the two. You get the first European influence on Japanese maps came in the late 16th century with the Portuguese. And it was at that stage that foreign maps were first brought to Japan. And the first Japanese maps of the world, other than the purely Buddhist maps of the world, which were based on Buddhist cosmography, are in fact copies of European maps. And then, as a result, you get, that's one influence. The other way is Japanese maps influencing European maps. For instance, the Gyogi type maps, some of them got to Europe probably in the late 16th century and were copied, or at least modified, for the first relatively accurate, is perhaps unfair, accurate maps of Japan. Then you get, I mean, in the 17th century, you get superb Japanese map makers like Ishikawa Ryusen, whose maps were definitely influenced European maps. Of course, there's a problem here, is that during the period of Japan's seclusion under the Tokugawa, it was not permitted to, they were not to take out maps out of Japan. Not permitted is perhaps was the rule. I mean, some people managed to do so. I mean, Kempfer in the late 17th century certainly got hold of some Japanese maps, and they influenced the early 18th century maps of Japan. Then, of course, you come into the early 19th century, and you have the famous case of Siebold, von Siebold, who was in Nagasaki. He was again, like Kempfer, a doctor to the Dutch mission, and he came up to Edo, and he met various Japanese map makers, and he got hold of copies of some of Ino Tadataka's maps.
Actually, well, the thing that interests me in the maps we saw earlier today, there was no mention of Hokkaido or Eizo. When did it get in? At about this time?
Well, you don't even in Japanese maps, you don't really get a proper depiction of Eizo or Hokkaido until the late 18th century.
Really, as late as that?
Interestingly enough, I mean, as you know, Hokkaido was developed, there was the fief of Matsumai, and you will find even on Japanese maps that Matsumai is shown as a little island below a sort of northern territories which are unknown. The first European to go to Eizo was a Jesuit priest, Father De Angelis, who later became a martyr, and he did a map which is based on his experiences, which is now in the Jesuit archives in Rome, and is an interesting picture of Eizo. But the really first ones, I mean, the most accurate one, of course, was Tarataka, but people like Hayashi Shihei. And on the European side, you get a number of voyages of exploration in the 17th century, going up to parts of Ezo.
Yes.
But as they didn't touch all of Ezo, they only touched bits of it, the picture is inaccurate. You don't really get accurate pictures of the Japanese islands, either in Japanese maps or in European maps, until the early 19th century.
But is the influence of European map making mostly felt in the accuracy of maps, or what?
Well, I think it must have been basically in accuracy, although to some extent there was, I would suspect, some influence of decoration. I think probably the use of ships on the maps. There's one feature, if I may, I'd just like to mention about Japanese maps, and that is, I mentioned the mythical elements, but I don't know whether you've ever come across this island, the island of women.
Oh, yes.
I've heard of it.
Well, that's fascinating because, of course, as you know, that this is a total myth, and it was based on the idea that the mariners who got there were picked up by these perhaps Amazons and duly seduced and then eaten.
Well, I'm afraid for you we have to move on because
Yes.
we're running out of time.
But I'm afraid so. I understand you have recently published a book on those Japanese maps, including myth.
Yes, I'm sorry. Forgive me for being bored going on about my interest. This is the book which I produced last autumn. It's got a rather nice cover.
Indeed.
And the Isles of Gold, now the title, as you probably know, goes back to Marco Polo, because these were the islands were thought to be sources of a great deal of gold. And I thought it was a good title, because you also get a lot of Japanese maps which use a great deal of gold in them. And if I might show you, you see the gold round here.
A real beauty, that one.
That is one. And then well, you see the influence of the Western. This is the Western world, as it was known at that stage.
The position of Japan is rather interesting. So on the side.
Yes, now that is
center.
very definite. I mean, the early maps do like this. They were copies. But then look at this map this is again the most famous map in Jotokuji in Fukui. This has been ascribed to Kano Eitoku, probably inaccurately, but it's late 16th century. But there you get the gold clouds, which are rather lovely.
Yes, it's beautiful, absolutely beautiful.
And some of these early maps, I wish I'd been able to afford some of these screen maps. They were really lovely. Look at this. Look at that.
Isn't that
Now,
gorgeous?
those screens come from the Osaka Namban Museum, and you've got these lovely figures. Now, I suspect that the use of these figures, you'll notice them in European maps, around European maps, Blau maps, for instance, and speed maps. The English had those sort of...
Yes, well, thank you very much indeed for that, sir. I believe you recently gave a lecture to the Asiatic Society of Japan, actually in January of '82. Could you tell us something, just for the sake of the viewers, about this society?
Yes, the Asiatic Society, I'm the president of it, or was for 2 years, is a society which was founded 111 years ago, designed to encourage the study of Japan and things Japanese, Asian things, in English. We have now about 500 members, Japanese and foreigners, and I think we publish every year the transactions. And it was because I was president, I felt, well, I really got to show something, that I did a lecture on antique maps, and that was actually what led me into producing this book in the end. I mean, this is a development and an expansion and of the lecture which I gave. I wish more people would join the Asiatic Society. They would learn about Japan,
Yes.
I mean foreigners, but also Japanese will learn about what foreigners are doing on their own country.
I'm sure many will after this program. But anyway, I read in the paper that your term of office here will end soon. And do you have any plans for the future?
Well, I shall go back to Britain. I certainly hope to keep in touch with Japan. I maybe do a little bit more of my own study, but I need to earn some money because I've got children still to educate, so I shall have to do some work in some way or another. But of course, most of my life, I spent over 15 years in Japan, and naturally, I can hardly say other than that I regard Japan as my second home.
So undoubtedly we'll be seeing you back in some capacity or other in this country.
Well, I hope I shall be able to come back, but I mustn't give my successor any trouble.
Anyway, could you say, Sir Hugh, we're just coming to the end now, that this is the sort of book that the average man in the street like myself could appreciate and understand and become interested in maps through?
Well, I hope so. That's certainly what I would like it to be. I have tried to write it for the layman. I'm not myself an expert cartographer or historian.
You must be getting close to it there.
And certainly the selection of maps has been designed to appeal. I hope it won't be just a coffee table book, but something that people will enjoy and read.
Yes, indeed. Well, thank you very, very much indeed for allowing us to come here today. It's been a splendid experience, and we've seen your book, and I hope it goes well, commercially as well as from the artistic point of view. And we wish you the very best of luck in your new career. So, from us all here at the British Embassy residence, it's goodbye until next time.
Goodbye.
Bye.